This is an interactive model that I developed to help make the complexity of pain and the possible effects of manual therapy a little easier to see and explore. And this isn't just a demonstration for you to watch. You can open the model yourself and manipulate all the controls that I'm going to be using in this video. What I'm going to do now is give you a quick tour of how the model works and some of the questions you can explore with it. At the simplest level, nociceptive information enters from the periphery and is processed by the spinal cord and brain. But the amount of nociceptive input is only part of the story. Peripheral and central sensitization can amplify the response. And the brain isn't just receiving information, there's also descending pathways that can inhibit or facilitate nociceptive processing. Context matters as well. Expectations, prior learning, agency, therapeutic alliance, and perceived safety can all influence how incoming information is processed. And touch provides another source of sensory information that can influence the system through several routes. Now, this is the simple model. If we switch to the pathway model, we'll get a much more detailed look at all of these. So if we look back at nociception again, we can see the A delta and C fiber inputs entering the dorsal horn and contributing to multiple ascending pathways. The sensory discriminative pathway involves the lateral thalamus and somatosensory cortex and contributes to things like the location and characteristics of the stimulus. Other pathways involve structures such as the anterior cingulate cortex, insula, amygdala, and hypothalamus, and contribute to affective, motivational, and autonomic aspects of the experience. Ordinary tactile input can influence nociceptive transmission at the spinal level, while affective touch has additional ascending pathways associated with the emotional interoceptive qualities of touch. And cortical and subcortical processes can influence nociceptive transmission through descending pathways involving structures such as the periaqueductal gray and the rostral ventral medulla. So even this more anatomical view is not a nociceptive pathway in the sense of a single line running from damaged tissue to pain. It's an interacting system. Now if we switch over to the inputs and mechanisms section, the model doesn't assign a unique physiological mechanism to every named modality. Instead, it asks what is actually happening during the session. So we can go down here and look at different kinds of inputs. There might be ordinary touch, affective touch, pressure, movement, stretching, rocking, heat and cold, or an input that reduces ongoing nociceptive drive. Lots of different kinds of things we can play with to see how it affects the system. Different techniques really can provide different kinds of sensory inputs, but named modalities often combine many of the same underlying ingredients. For instance, two practitioners using the same modality may actually provide quite different sessions, while practitioners using very different modalities may provide remarkably similar sensory and contextual experiences. So you can see all the different possible options that we can play with over here to look at how the model is affected. Now let's move on to guided lessons. There are also guided explorations that use the model to examine particular questions about manual therapy. So you can look at those here. You can ask questions about particular aspects of this topic and see which parts of the model are relevant to that question. Now let's move over to the session builder. The session builder lets us put all these pieces together. So we can begin with the dominant pain mechanism right here. We'll say it's mostly nociceptive. And then we can independently change the sensitization level. We'll keep it at low sensitization. And we can adjust the implicit safety level. And then we can play with the amount of agency a person has and whether the fit is right. Is this what the person's wanting from the session? Is it tolerable? Is it appropriate for this particular client? And so then we can add the dominant session input. So we'll say it's effective, pleasant touch, which is basically effleurage. And then we come up here and we run the model. And we watch how things are affected over a period of 60 seconds. 60 seconds corresponds to 60 minutes. So you see how things evolve over time during the session. So that's just one run of the model. We can just reset it here, and also then come in here and just change it. We can just say change implicit safety to high, and then run it again and see how things are affected. Each of these settings up here can then be further adjusted if you want. We can adjust these individually. Each one of these settings can be manually adjusted all you want. So that was high. You can see that we got lots of descending modulation going on there, but if we reset it and we change implicit safety to low and ran it, what we're going to see is not the same kind of descending input that we had before. So as the model session progresses, the pathways change dynamically, and we can see the estimated effects on the system and on outcomes. These numbers are deliberately presented as teaching estimates, not measurements or clinical predictions. The purpose is to make relationships visible. And this is one of the most important things the model is designed to demonstrate. We can give essentially the same intervention to a different nervous system or in a different context and get a different modeled response. Pleasant touch isn't inherently regulating, deep pressure isn't inherently therapeutic, movement isn't inherently safe or threatening. What an input does depends partly on the state of the system receiving it. All right, and we can go over here to comparing the sessions. The comparison tool makes that easier to see. So here we can set up a comparison that is a custom comparison. So this would be scenario 1, scenario 2. We can manipulate all these different variables between the two and see how it goes. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick the same biology with a different implicit safety, and you just get an instant effect. Rather than running a model for 60 seconds, you get an instant guesstimate of how that might go, where we have the same setup, but the only thing that's different is high implicit safety versus low implicit safety, meaning this person the client doesn't feel safe with the practitioner. So the outcomes are going to be different. So we can play with all sorts of different presets or change things individually to get instant estimates of what might happen. It's the goal isn't to predict exactly how much someone's pain is going to change. It's to ask better mechanistic questions about why the same intervention might have different effects in different people or at different times. And we can go over here last to the evidence and assumptions tab. I've tried to make the model's limitations as explicit as its claims. So you can see the research that is behind it. You can filter that research. If you want to look at descending modulation, for instance, versus pharmacology links versus manual therapy research, it's all here and filtered. You can look at the assumptions, the claims I'm not making, the logic, my own limits, and critique that I would say this model has. So it's all here that you can take a look at. So this is not intended to be a complete representation of pain physiology, and it certainly isn't a clinical prediction tool. It's a teaching model, a way of making a complicated system visible enough that we can manipulate it, question it, and talk about it. And one of the ideas I hope becomes clearer by exploring it is that the effects of manual therapy probably depend less on the name of the modality than on what we actually do, the sensory and contextual inputs we create, and the nervous system that receives them. We go through this model and the neuroscience behind it in much more detail in my Neuroscience of Pain, Posture, and Bodywork CE course. There we can spend lots of time not just looking at the pathways, but examining what the research does and doesn't support about pain, posture, manual therapy, and the mechanisms through which bodywork may have its effects. But you don't need to take the course to explore the model. The interactive version is available here for you to use yourself. Try changing the controls, building different clients and sessions, and seeing what questions come up. And since the model is still developing, I'd especially like to hear what you think it gets right, what it gets wrong, and what you think could make it better. So thanks for watching, and I hope to hear some feedback from anyone soon. Have a good day.